everybody. This is Greg again from Jeppe Boats and Blades, and today I have the absolute privilege and pleasure of introducing Fritz Roberg to you. Many of you would know Fritz from the 80s and as a Jeppe coach in the 90s. Fritz was also a member of the 81 First Aid crew who won the SA Champs that year, and they were the first crew to row in the Alley Cat. Now, the Alley Cat, if I'm not mistaken, was the last wooden 8 to win SA Schools Champs. And I also had the privilege of rowing with Fritz in the 1982 crew. So, Fritz, good afternoon to you, and thank you for taking the time to talk to us at Jeppe Boats and Blades.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Privilege.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Just another piece of information that people may not be aware of. In the time that Fritz was with the school as a coach and ultimately working as a teacher, the school had the rowing club, should I say, had a mandate to bring Jeppe rowing back on track. And with Fritz's help, they were able to purchase. They had a very ambitious plan. It was a 2-year plan, and they were able to ultimately buy kit, boats, equipment, boat shed, and in those years, Jeppe Rowing certainly had amassed fantastic comeback in terms of its achievements. And so, Fritz, in many ways, what you did in the 90s and what we're looking to do at the moment as Jeppe Boats and Blades, there's a lot of synergy there. So it's great to speak to a like-minded oarsman who's not only has the vision, but delivered against it. So that's really, really great. So I guess the first question, Fritz, why rowing? What drew you to the sport in the first place?
So my mother is a German, and she was born in Germany. So she was exposed to the sport, and none of us knew it. But she suggested that when I went to Jeppe that maybe because they did have rowing that I should try it. I suppose the story I have around that is that I rowed in Standard 6. In Standard 7, my mother said my marks weren't good enough, and she felt that I should maybe dedicate my time to studies, which I didn't do. But the theory was anyway that if I had more time, I would. And the story goes like this, and it was a serendipitous moment. I was at the fields on a Saturday morning in the boarding house, and Grant Neal and his dad Dennis, they arrived there on the Saturday morning and said, "Come, get your kit. You're coming with us to row." And I said, "My mother says I can't race." He says, "Don't worry, I'll sort it out." So he took me, and that was the Viera regatta that were General Smuts. And we drove all the way out there, and we had a little under 14.4, and they had a member short, and I joined that crew. Long story short, that crew then in under 15, we eventually went to win the gold in the under 15 fours. And 3 of those members ended up being in the 8 with me in the following year, which was the winning combination. So if that day Dennis Neal hadn't come and picked me up, I don't only think my rowing career and all that would be different, but I honestly believe that I would not have been where I am today.
Excellent. Wow, that's an amazing story. And I remember the Neals fondly as well. So, Fritz, you've made mention to this now, but how has your time as a Jeppe oarsman impacted your adult life?
Well, if I go back a little, I mean, I have to start where it came. When I came to Jeppe, I didn't come from a very illustrious primary school career, let's just say. I wasn't particularly coordinated, so I didn't play any ball sports. Academics wasn't my strength either. So actually, when I came to the school, I wasn't doing particularly well. Socially, because I didn't interact and didn't do sport and that, I struggled. And I struggled to fit in. And fortunately, when I started rowing, I was, because it's a team sport, and because the opportunity to go and be part of something that required discipline, involvement, as we did it in rowing, suddenly gave me a home, if you like. And when I was in the crew, what is so brilliant about rowing as a sport is it's because it's mechanical in nature. It's been very, very good at developing things like coordination. So the mechanical nature, the team aspect, the discipline brought me into, and I suddenly started getting some results and achievements that I'd never got in my entire life to that point. So later on, when I got involved in the school as a as an oarsman and had that level of success, I then left and I decided I'm going to do teaching. And the reason why I did teaching is because I wanted to coach sport, because of the experience I had had. And I wanted to pass that on and make sure that others would get the same. And so I was very fortunate when I got involved in resurrecting the club in the 90s, coming from a very low base where they were struggling to make, and we as a club were kind of outcast at the time, really struggling financially and struggling in every way. And having the chance to come from a low base and help them build up what we'd experienced, Greg, when we were at school, and Chris, you'll remember. And the reality is that we brought that back in, this pride, this ability to go, remembering what it was like to. And so, you know, when we did that, I treated it as a business. Unknowingly at the time, I just used my guts. And we put a business plan together. And we galvanized the one thing that you can, and that is the energy parents have around their children doing better. That's a massive energy. And later on, when we talk a little bit about how we can harness that energy, and I think you guys are getting it right, is when we belong to something and we see something that can change the lives of our children. And that's what we did. And when the early wins were only in discipline and only in the way that we were on the water, at least there was a win. And very quickly, we were able to do some wonderful things. And I took that on. And then afterwards, the reality dawned upon me. Then I was fortunate enough to get involved in the junior rowing program. And as you know, I established that again with Paolo Cavalieri. And I was very fortunate enough to get the junior rowing program going. And we used the same principles as we did when we started St Andrews Rowing. So use the business principle, the idea of putting the basics in place, using the wonderful sport of rowing to galvanize energy and get people out, and also have youngsters who struggled from a discipline point of view or performance point of view, suddenly having, you know, growing up and developing. And we saw this happen. And I think most of us feel and know we've experienced that ourselves. And of course, later on, and when I went to the industry and I went to the motor trade of all places, and worked my way up as a director, that was probably the toughest part of my life. But one thing rowing did teach me, and it still does all the time, is this idea of developing fortitude, this idea of staying in the game. You will experience failure, you will bump your head. But when you do it together with other members, when you do it as a team, when you've got a goal and a drive, and particularly us, I think at JP, where, you know, often we were the not less favored. We didn't always have the resources and the stuff, but somehow that's the great energy we can develop. That sometimes we are not as fancied and we could go and beat more fancied individuals. And that galvanization, that idea that maybe you come from the wrong side of town. And, you know, so anyway, that helped me all along, almost this idea that it doesn't matter where you start, it doesn't matter where you come from. If you work at it and you have a plan, you can make something happen. And so, you know, I left teaching for a while, but actually at heart, I've always been a teacher, I've always developed in that. And so as a business coach, you know, now I've taken a lot of those things that I learned, a lot of the stuff I learned from my early days in my working career and my own school career. And I've applied those principles in what I do with my clients. Sure, I've learned enough, studied in that, but the basics are still there. And I've found, you know, if you look today, the businesses that do best are the ones that work together. And the interesting thing about a rowing boat is that you mix this balance between ego on the one side. You need a big ego, you know, to want to work so hard and want to win. On the other hand, it has to be tempered enough to be willing to do exactly the same movement as the person in front of you and behind you. And when you get that balance right, and if you think about a business concept, the same thing applies. You need individuals with key strengths, key attributes, and yet we've got to work seamlessly together enough that it's not that obvious. But when put together, it can create something phenomenal. So I would say, you know, rowing has been absolutely instrumental in building my confidence, and it's instrumental so often in what I see today and everything in my life. So I'm incredibly grateful to the sport of rowing and to the people I've met, people like Lamorna Canton, you know. Those are people who had my back, shielded me from the reactions I often got because of my dictatorial, passionate approach. Now, that's probably what was required in the early days, but without a Lamorna Canton, we wouldn't have succeeded, that's for sure. The Alan Francis of this world, you know, came along and helped us and gave us something. There were fathers from fathers, you know, there was a father at school or a father at rowing. I mean, he was our godfather. We loved that guy. We'd go to the ends of the earth for him. And just having that home and that place, and those camps were that, you know. And so my fellow oarsmen, you know, you guys, looking at what you're doing, you know, to be part of a community and a family. And even in my junior rowing days, when I was coaching the national squads, guys from, from St Andrews or St Stephen's or so on, and realized we're all the community, and it's a very special part of my life, and will always be. So very material, absolutely, beyond what I can explain in a short few words.
Excellent, thank you. Now, Fritz, you're familiar with the Jeppe Boats and Blades cause, and thank you very much for your generous donations to date. What are your thoughts about the initiative, and how do you believe we can spread the word and garner outside interest to support the club, to support what we're doing from corporates and other old boys?
Well, I mean, I think you're doing it already, and what we're doing here is we're telling stories. I think that stories are very powerful. Number one, the brain likes them because it can remember them. Pictures and stories and memories and so on. So you are creating stories, and this story carries on. It started somewhere long before I was involved, and it'll carry on long after I'm gone. And we will play our own little piece in it. So telling that story, and I just want to commend you guys in what you're doing. I love it. I think you're using technology now, which is smart. I think the story about David and Goliath is a good one. I think it's one that we need to maybe pull through as a theme. We definitely are David. We do play in a world, but if I remember correctly, when I started with rowing the club and working with them in the 90s, that was just before St Benedict's became a powerhouse. And I remember when they copied us to get going. What we did at the time, they were copying our exact formula. And Dobson at the time came to me and he kept picking our brains, and he just made a science of it, and he was just there for the long game. We've done it over generations with different individuals. So that people like Ben Benan and those passionate individuals who've come along over the years, who haven't always benefited as much as some of us have from the sport, and yet somehow contribute disproportionately. So we have this huge family that if we can garner their involvement, even though we're busy and we're doing stuff, and we can share that story, tell that story as often as possible, and embellish it further, I think that's a great place to start. I think what Dale is doing with the school, is just phenomenal. I'm so proud to be part of that school. And I have to say, they're doing a better job they did than when we were there. If I'm being honest, as much as I love the idea that we did, but if I look at what he's done with the team, the integration, the level of the quality of the pupils coming out of the school. And I think it's a massive story to tell, because we're a government school. We come from, we're in an interesting area. We're in an oasis in terms of our geography. When you go into that place, and it's been created by old boys. It's been created by people in the place who just love the sport, parents. And I think that's a story to work on. And I think then also I go back to the old story. There's got to be a plan. And I think somewhere along the idea of, the leadership, Michelle and the team, what's the plan? What's the 5-year plan? And the plan is we want to win champs. We want to do this. We want so many teachers involved. We'd like so many pupils to be participating. We'd like to get overall trophy for this. We'd like to have, we just want participants. We can brag about the number of kids who came through the school, kids who started here and did this. I think that kind of thing will galvanize. And if we can communicate what that plan is, and we can show people what the journey looks like along the way, and we can get others to dream and follow this journey, I think that you will find you're going to get this momentum, like so many movements. And you've certainly started that with the 8. And I think we're back in 81, we're back there. Our first time that Jeppe had an 8. And then we had a wooden boat that we bought. And we were a bunch of ragbag kind of individuals. And we were thrown together by a guy who was passionate about rowing and had a lot of experience. And we were competing against professional coaches with massive resources. And we beat them. And we can always beat them, because energy and passion and desire beats all that other stuff. And that's what we've got to galvanize. And we can. And you're doing it now. So phenomenal. I love it. Whatever part I can play in doing that, absolutely willing to and happy to be involved.